Yes, welcome students again. Today I will be discussing about public finance, that means fiscal policy as well as budget. See, these two chapters are absolutely theoretical chapters, so it may be seeming to be easier for many of you as there is no graph, hardly any graph is there. Let's begin with budget. Firstly, what is budget? That definition, which may not come, it's very easy. It's very simple, short. What is budget? Okay. Then types of budget, union budget and state budget. These two can come. And then after that, the components of government budget, revenue budget and capital budget. See, components of government budget, this can be a very important question. Components of government budget. Revenue budget consists of revenue receipts and revenue expenditures. In these revenue receipts and revenue expenditures, no asset is created or reduced, no liability is created or reduced. It's only because of the normal day-to-day functioning of the government. When the government receives certain amount of money as income earning, that is revenue receipts. And from the revenue receipts, when the government spends money for different activities, but no asset is created or reduced, no liability is created or reduced, then that is about revenue receipts, revenue expenditures. So in case of revenue budget, we find no asset creation or reduction, no liability creation or reduction. Only because of or for the normal day-to-day functioning of the government receiving money as revenue receipts and government spending money, revenue expenditure. Capital budget consists of capital receipts and capital expenditure, in which case we find capital receipts are those receipts in which case money comes to the government, but when money comes in, an asset is reduced, an asset is lost or reduced, or liability is created. Money comes to the government, it's an incoming of money for the government, but along with that incoming of money for the government, an asset is lost or reduced, or a liability is created. Like when the government makes the disinvestment, that is privatization. When the government sells off a public sector enterprise to private industrialist, then government gets money because a private industrialist is purchasing that company and the money comes to the government. This money comes to the government and the asset is lost. That asset, the property, the factory, the company, which belonged to government, which was a public sector enterprise, is now no more a public sector enterprise. So asset is reduced, money comes. Or government takes a fresh loan. When the government takes a fresh loan, the money comes to the government, but along with this incoming of money, liability is created. So this is about capital receipts. Think about the opposite, capital expenditure. In case of capital expenditure, money goes out from the government. Government spends money. And when government spends money, asset is created or a liability is reduced. Like when the government purchases a plot of land or a building, then money goes out from the government spends money, and along with that going out of the money, the asset is created. That now that plot of land or the building, now it belongs to government. So asset is created. Or the outstanding loans, the previous loans, the government is making the repayment along with interest, principal sum along with interest, the government repays. Then liability which was there is now reduced. So this is about capital budget, which consists of capital receipts and capital expenditure. So that's a very important topic, that is components of government budget. Now after that, in the budget chapter, at the end of this chapter, you have in budget revenue deficit, fiscal deficit, and primary deficit. Learn the meaning or definitions of each. Revenue expenditure minus revenue receipts, revenue deficit. Fiscal deficit is equal to total budgetary expenditure of the government consisting of revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. That is total budgetary expenditure minus total budgetary receipts of the government consisting of revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. Excluding borrowing, that is important to note here, excluding borrowing. So this is fiscal deficit. And primary deficit is equal to fiscal deficit minus interest payments. These three the meaning of these three: revenue deficit, fiscal deficit, and primary deficit. And not only the meaning, for each of these three, you need to also learn the implications. Two implications for each of these three types of deficit. So this is about the budget chapter. Now let's focus on fiscal policy. Firstly, meaning of fiscal policy. Then one topic is there, which is deficit financing. Only meaning, only definition, nothing else regarding deficit financing. When the government has deficit in the budget, then that deficit is financed by making new currency notes and coins, by making new currency, new money. Then that process of making new money to fill the deficit, to meet the deficit in the budget, that is called deficit financing. So only the meaning, only the definition. Next is what are the objectives of fiscal policy? Like, one objective is to reduce income and wealth inequalities. One objective is to reduce or tackle inflation, that is bring about price stability. One objective is to promote or accelerate economic growth. One objective is to make provision for the public goods to the people. So these are the objectives. You need to know the objectives of fiscal policy. Now, you can be given a question like, what type of fiscal policy the government can adopt or can take to tackle inflation. See, you can mention: 1, to tackle inflation. When there is rising prices, aggregate demand is high, then government intends to reduce the aggregate demand, then inflation will be reduced. So government will increase the taxes, first fiscal policy, and government will reduce its own expenditure. These two can be. Okay. How to reduce income inequalities? Government will implement more of progressive taxation. Government will increase expenditure on the upliftment of the poor. Government will implement progressive taxation more, and government may increase public expenditure for the upliftment of the poor. So you need to improvise if the question comes, what type of fiscal policy can be adopted by the government for specific situations, like tackling inflation, or to bring about price stability, same thing, or if the question is given regarding a fiscal policy which can be adopted to reduce income and wealth inequalities, what type of fiscal policy can be adopted. Okay. Next is, what do you mean by impact of tax and incidence of tax? Impact of tax refers to the effect of the tax burden at the first instance on that person on whom initially the tax is imposed. Impact of tax refers to the initial effect of the tax burden on that person on whom, at the first instance, on whom initially the tax is imposed. This is impact of tax. And incidence of tax refers to the effect of the tax burden on that person who ultimately pays off the tax. So that's the difference between impact of tax and incidence of tax. Now, on this basis, the question can be distinguished between direct taxes and indirect taxes. Direct taxes, in which case impact of tax and incidence of tax are on the same person. Indirect taxes are taxes in which case impacts of tax and incidence of tax are on different persons. Moreover, another point of difference is, in case of direct taxes, the tax burden, the burden of the tax cannot be shifted from one person to another. Whereas in case of indirect taxes, the burden of the tax can be shifted from one person to another person. You know the examples of direct taxes and indirect taxes. Now, along with these, you will learn the merits and demerits of direct taxes and also indirect taxes. Merits and demerits. Now we come to progressive, proportional, regressive, and digressive taxation, along with the graphs representing each. Progressive tax: when income rises, income of the taxpayer rises, the tax rate also rises. Progressive tax. The graph will be an upward sloping straight line in the graph, where along the x-axis we are measuring income, along the y-axis we are measuring tax rate. Proportional tax: when the income rises, tax rate remains constant. Here, the graph will consist of a curve of a horizontal straight line parallel to the x-axis. Regressive tax, where the rate of tax falls when income rises. Income of the taxpayer increases, the rate of tax rate falls. It's a downward sloping straight line in the graph. And fourthly, the digressive tax, in which case initially the tax rate increases when income increases, but this occurs up to a certain limit, up to a certain level, after which even if income of the taxpayer increases, the tax rate remains constant. So graphically representing this in the graph, initially it will be an upward sloping straight line till a certain level, and after that, even when the income is rising, it will be a straight line, horizontal straight line parallel to the x-axis. So this is regarding the four types of taxation: progressive, proportional, regressive, and digressive. Next you have public debt. What is public debt? Internal public debt, external public debt. Then the methods of public debt redemption. Methods of public debt redemption. All the methods. Like repudiation of public debt, sinking fund, terminable annuities, debt conversion, refunding, all these. But one advice to you: if you are asked a question to write 4 methods of public debt redemption, it's my advice to you, don't write about repudiation, that is refusal by the government to repay the loans. Don't write this one. See, if you forget all the others or one you are missing, then you have to write. But my advice is don't write repudiation. You have the others, so you can write about the others, like refunding, debt conversion, sinking fund approach, terminable annuities, capital levy, all these you can write. Public debt redemption. Next is public expenditure. In case of public expenditure, what do you mean by public expenditure? What is productive expenditure? What is unproductive expenditure? What is developmental public expenditure? What is non-developmental public expenditure? These. Then another question is regarding the reasons behind the growth of public expenditure in the recent times in India. Different reasons you can cite, like increase in the defense expenditure, increase of the government expenditure to tackle inflation and to fulfill the needs of the people, to make provision for the public utilities or public goods for the people, then for infrastructural development, for making the industrial development, for making agricultural development. These are the obvious reasons which have led to increase in the public expenditure in the recent times in India. Right? So these are which you have to study in fiscal policy. Okay, in fiscal policy you have generally these are the topics. Nothing more. Now, if you study all these thoroughly to the depth, conceptually all things are clear, then any question which is asked to you, you can answer. So go through these with proper understanding. You can answer any question, because these 2 chapters, fiscal policy and budget, these are very easy because absolutely theoretical. Apart from that graphical approach of representing the progressive, proportional, regressive and digressive taxes, the other topics in these 2 chapters are all theoretical. Nothing is so graphical or mathematical. That is why it becomes easier for the students to learn and to write the answers regarding these from these 2 chapters. So that's all about fiscal policy and budget. Thank you.